definitely talk about that. We're definitely going to go to Japan and spend a little bit of time there, as that occupies an entire chapter of your book. As I'm looking at this graph, I'm seeing the years on the bottom. I'm seeing the consumption totals, sugar going up and then kind of flatlining. I'm seeing vegetable oils, be it nothing, zero, and then kind of comes up. Yeah, there we go. Really interesting to see also different inflection points. So I see a large increase right around that 1911. So Procter and Gamble, they're making Crisco. They market it beautifully. At the time, I think it was also fair to say that we were having big problems with the health of cooking with lard, cooking with that butter that was now being produced in cities and was probably having all kinds of different health issues. This was the alternative. The Crisco is the the clean white fat that's going to make your cookies great and your crackers great, and they marketed it really well to all the American mothers and gave them all cookbooks. We continue through the 1930s, 1940s. Heart attacks are now on the rise. We gotta figure something out with heart attacks because so many people are dying. And through the 1950s, even our own American president, President Eisenhower, suffers a heart attack, has to be out of the Oval Office, I think, for 2 weeks. It's on everybody's mind, and we have to figure out something with heart attacks. And the strongest idea at the time was when we cut open somebody that has a heart attack, we see a lot of cholesterol. We know that if somebody eats animal fats and proteins, their cholesterol is higher. And we know that if they swap out those fats for polyunsaturated fats, the cholesterol is lowered. So in 1961, all of that to say, in 1961, I see a giant inflection point. Can you explain what happened in the leading up to 1961 that really changed the course of vegetable oil and took it on a much steeper trajectory?
Yeah, that was well, you probably could tell that story just as well or better than I could, Casey. But that was when Ansel Keys had influenced the American Heart Association and was also sitting on the board of the American Heart Association, and he and his colleagues got together and blamed saturated fat for heart disease. Right. And so after that, the American Heart Association, which had, which was, neatly aligned with this hypothesis that, that saturated fat is driving heart disease, promulgated to Americans to consume more vegetable oils and less saturated fat. And of course, this is what has, stuck. And it to this day, the major nutrition organizations and the American Heart Association, they're all promulgating a diet high in unsaturated fats, vegetable oils. And to this day, the American Heart Association tells us to consume no more than 5 to 6% of our calories as saturated fat. It's absolutely insane that this continues. When you could look at populations like the Maasai, who consumed, it's 40 to 46% of their diet was saturated fat, and they had no heart disease. George Mann study in 1972. And the Tokelauans, who consume, that's presented in the book. Their diet is mostly coconut oil from, they're eating coconuts. Well, that's the biggest part of their diet. Coconuts, fish, starchy tubers, and fruit. That's their diet. That's it. And their diet, 50% saturated fat coming from coconut oil. They had no heart disease and no diabetes and no obesity, right? So, there's so much evidence, and it's the same story for Americans in the 19th century. We were touted as the greatest carnivores on the planet. I don't think that is that it would have included a comparison to the Inuit, or what people would have called Eskimos back in that era, but who were almost strictly carnivore. But Americans ate more meat than anybody on the planet that we know of, other than Inuit, and we had no heart disease. So again. And we were fantastically healthy, as you've seen. We had no obesity, we had no diabetes. So, Casey, I'm sharing this next slide. Can I mention this one?
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll continue. We're talking here about obesity or overweight, and this is specifically obesity. But since we're going to run out of time here soon, I'm sure. But we can just apply these principles to all the other diseases. I mean, because obesity is not the problem. Obesity runs with all these other diseases because they're all caused by the same thing. So when you look at obesity or significant overweight, that's driven by processed foods and primarily vegetable oils. And again, these are the same drivers that are driving coronary heart disease and cancers and stroke and diabetes and metabolic syndrome and macular degeneration and autoimmune disorders. So here, this graph, I just want to show, can you see that, Casey?
Yeah,
okay.
Fantastic.
So we're looking at, we're looking at obesity versus vegetable oil and sugar in the United States. And this is just from 1999 through 2018. And you can see that obesity has had a huge increase since 1999. It was 30.5% that year. And by 2018, 42.5% obesity. And look at it track, though, right with the vegetable oils, while the sugar is falling since 2004. So we see a substantial drop in sugar consumption, again, precisely while obesity goes up. And this is exactly what we see with diabetes. And you probably could apply this to some of the other chronic conditions, but anyway.
Yeah, it's fascinating. This one really surprised me. I mean, due to the number of like soda stores around me and what I see people eating, it's not a low amount of sugar, but it is very striking to see over the course of the last 2 decades that it is going down. We don't consume as much as we did 20 years ago. Very interesting.
Right. I mean, to me, it's obvious that sugar is not the primary problem. It's vegetable oils. And again, I know that, that is disappointing to people who, believe so fervently in this sugar hypothesis. But again, you can't, it's hard to argue with the data here. And again, and I'm also, and I've said this over and over, I'm not here to defend sugar. I've been saying since I started my book on macular degeneration back in 2015 and went public with all this in 2016, sugar's a part of the problem. And I'm not here to advise people to consume added sugars. That's, if you believe that, you're missing my point. Sugars are problematic. They're a nutrient deficient food, and they contribute to degenerative diseases, right along with refined flours, exactly like Weston Price found. So, but as I mentioned, in Price's day, vegetable oils were very low in consumption, and that's obviously just changed dramatically in the last 80 years or so.
Yeah, it's really interesting to reflect back on that time, the 1960s, where we actively started promoting vegetable oils in the diet. And we changed the diets of every man, woman, and child. We recommended everybody in the country change your diet for really one problem that was really kind of mostly only affecting one subset of the population. You had kind of middle-aged men that were dying of heart attacks. And so everybody was recommended to change that, just for that one thing. And you would have thought, like, if this was going to be successful, at the very, very least, we may have other problems, but at least we would have helped with heart attacks, at least in that subset of people. And you see the graph of vegetable oil go up, and you look at the numbers today, and we have not fixed the one thing that we were trying to fix, the heart disease. And now we have all of these other crazy metabolic diseases that we're dealing with that were unknown a century ago and super rare even 50 years ago. It's just interesting to reflect, and it's lamentable that we had to go and do that.